IGEPHA im Gespräch. Der Podcast der Austrian Self-Care Association. Herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von IGEPHA im Gespräch, dem Podcast der Interessensvertretung der österreichischen Self-Care-Industrie. Heute darf ich einen hervorragenden Kenner des globalen Self-Care-Marktes als Gesprächspartner begrüßen. Nicholas Hall, Vorstandsvorsitzender und Leiter der Creative Solutions bei der Nicholas Hall Group of Companies, ist in unserem Podcast-Studio zu Gast. Herzlich willkommen, Nicholas.
Hello, Christina. Well, thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be part of your podcast, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of our experience from COVID with you.
Ich darf Sie unserem Podcast-Publikum kurz vorstellen. Nach einer Berufskarriere im Marketing und General Management bei Procter Gamble, Vicks und GD Searle hat Nicholas Hall 1978 die Nicholas Hall Group of Companies gegründet. Nicholas Hall verfügt über jahrzehntelange Erfahrung in der Self-Care- und Consumer-Healthcare-Branche. Er arbeitet mit einem Team von über 60 Branchenfachleuten mit Sitz in Großbritannien, Singapur, den USA und Australien zusammen. Nicholas Hall bietet Beratungs- und Marketingdienstleistungen für viele international erfolgreiche Pharmaunternehmen an. Seit 1978 hat sich die Nicholas Hall Group zu einem der größten Anbieter von Marketingdienstleistungen für die Self-Care-Branche entwickelt. Das Angebot der Gruppe umfasst strategische Beratung, die Analyse von Verkaufsdaten aus einer globalen OTC-Datenbank sowie die Publikation von aktuellen Reports. In international hoch angesehenen Konferenzen lassen sich Top-Führungskräfte über die neuesten Innovationen und Trends am Self-Care-Sektor informieren. Nicholas Hall hat zuletzt 2 neue Web-Applikationen gestartet, mit denen man mit einem Klick über die neuesten Entwicklungen am Laufenden bleibt. Nicholas Hall hat auch die IGEPHA bereits mehrfach als Speaker und Studienautor unterstützt und kennt daher den österreichischen Self-Care-Markt. Für unsere Fragen an Nicholas werden wir nun auf Englisch wechseln. Nicholas, Corona is still a major issue for all of us. As an expert for the global consumer healthcare market, you have been observing the economic development particularly closely since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. What is the result of your analysis? What impact is the COVID pandemic having on the self-care sector?
So I'm going to speak very much from a European perspective because we saw different outcomes in North America, Latin America, Asia Pacific. But for Austria and Western Europe, I think we see the same trends. The first thing to say is that when the pandemic first started, which is about 14 months ago, well, that's when we first knew about it. In fact, several of us caught COVID in 2019 when we didn't have a word for it. But from January 2020, when we heard about what was happening in Wuhan in China, the first expectation was that the consumer healthcare market would be very badly damaged. People can't get out. If they can't get to the pharmacy, that's bound to have a bad effect. What we didn't take into account was the huge rise of e-commerce. And what happens is that if you look at the total market, then in fact it's ahead in 2020 of 2019. Now, in the first half of 2020, we assumed it was going to be a bonanza, that pantry filling would give us huge sales. We saw the big drive towards immunity, towards disinfection. And I heard people talking about the market globally growing at about 10%. In fact, it came in at about 5%, which is a little bit up on where we were in the years before. Western Europe, of course, hasn't done as well as the rest of the world. The market is flatter. There were other issues, loss of reimbursement over many features. What happened in the second half of 2020 was that consumers had already bought once, filled up their pantries, their medicine chests, they didn't buy again. There was a terrible cough and cold season. And what happened there was that we started to see a very weak end of the year. So the market, as I say, it came in finally at 5%. It was still ahead of 4.6%. Here I'm talking globally. Western Europe was way down. It was neutral. Basically, increased e-commerce balanced a reduction in sales at pharmacy. So the big markets like Germany, France, Italy, UK was neutral. But within the market, we've seen a big turnaround. So what was best was immunity. certain types of painkillers, and anything to do with disinfection. Weakest were product categories that required you to go outside. So we saw a real fall in anything to do with gastrointestinals because people weren't eating out. We saw a reduction in dermatologicals. People really weren't so concerned about their physical appearance. And a number of lifestyle products went down. So although the total market was neutral or up, the balance has changed. I think that drive to prevention is going to stay with us. We now call that prevent, treat, and protect. So these immunity products, which are very much in the protect space, they will continue, not at the COVID levels, but they'll be ahead of where they were in 2019. Disinfection will be up, same thing, not as big as 2020, but still pretty good. And the categories that were weak, topical pain relief, digestive, derm, and lifestyle, they'll get back to normal. So we're expecting a difficult market in 2021. No doubt about it. E-commerce will be good. Bricks and mortar will be quite weak. And Christina, the other very important thing is that this was the year that a lot of consumers no longer relied on their doctor. That umbilical cord with the doctor was cut because you physically couldn't see a doctor. And when you Zoomed, they really didn't want to talk about some minor irritation. If you've got COVID, I'll talk to you. You've got the other major conditions, oncology, cardiovascular, they'll talk. You want to talk about your ingrowing toenails? Forget it. Get off my Zoom call. So that's taught consumers to be much more dependent on themselves, more self-reliant in a way, more so in the US than in Europe, but we still saw the trend there. So that's it as far as I know.
So hope for 21, you think, or weaker than 22? 20, sorry.
Slightly stronger than 2020 because e-commerce will be strong. Now that, of course, varies country by country. Germany, UK, very strong e-commerce, and it will get stronger. Other countries, France, Italy, Russia, very weak. I don't know the situation in Austria, you know it better than me, but probably along with Germany, it will be a good e-commerce market. We expect all of those markets to increase, and the big markets I mentioned, Germany, UK, double in size. In fact, e-commerce will probably account for about 25% of the total market in those countries. We're talking about big, big numbers. And our thinking has really changed on this. We used to think that when a consumer moved from bricks and mortar to e-commerce, that was like moving from a brand to a private label. You never go back. But research from GSK and Ipsos shows that, in fact, consumers just add e-commerce to the other outlets, and they make up their mind day by day. This month I'm going to this week I'm going to the pharmacy or the supermarket, and I'll buy my medicines there. Next month, I'm going to buy on e-commerce because it suits me. I want the products that are best on e-commerce, ones where I need information or sensitive, intimate topics I don't want to talk about in a pharmacy, or where there's a price advantage. So it's called, multi-channel, omni-channel. We think that will make the markets in Europe about as good as 2020. 2022 is when we see the revival and we get back to hopefully normal patterns. We're told that all of us have been saving money during the lockdown and haven't spent it. We've got money to spend. Let's hope so. Let's hope some of it comes our way in consumer healthcare. So that's my expectation.
Well, we hope that everybody's spending all their money on OTCs then. What else do you think the self-care industry should learn from the crisis?
So I think it definitely shows us that consumers are very interested in prevention. Europe, and I've presented at your meetings before, Europe was traditionally a treatment market, and the fastest growth categories were treatments. Last year, that all changed. When you look at the leaderboard, there are only 2 out of about 12 growth categories which are treatments, one of which is asthma remedies from a very small base. The others are all about prevention, and most of that is COVID related. We think that will stay. Consumers are going to take more decisions about themselves. They're going to want to prevent rather than get sick and treat, because COVID taught us that once you've got COVID, some people die, some people have long COVID, which lasts a year. It took me a year to get over my COVID, I have to say. I contracted it in Beijing in October 2019, and it was really not until October of 2020 that I can say that I was fully over the symptoms. So consumers know that COVID is, it's not like getting a cold. It's much, much more serious. And anything you can do to strengthen your immunity, to prevent yourself from getting it, to build immunity into the system, or disinfection. The latest results say that surface cleaning isn't as important, but I think consumers are going to use the hand sanitizers. They're going to use the various products for wiping down surfaces. That will last. The other thing, I know I'm expressing a lot of ideas here, but this is important. Working from home is going to stay with us. And what that does is, that's going to change the balance of where we shop. It's going to move people from city centres and big shopping centres to the suburbs. It's moving people from towns to smaller towns and the countryside. And that means that the independent pharmacy in those countries where you have chains or where you have the supermarkets, the independent pharmacy is going to be even more important. Even at a time of e-commerce, the independent pharmacy is going to reach a peak in terms of the advice he or she gives to the customer on health matters. Now in UK, different in Austria, but in UK, where we have basically a chain model, that really is giving a new lease of life to the independent pharmacist. In Austria, it's different. You have independent pharmacies, but I think that is actually going to almost prevent the chains wanting to come, assuming they can change the law, which they probably can't. But so I think that's good news for the industry.
Well, great. That brings me to the next question, because you carried out a study for us in 2017 on the further development of OTC distribution channels in Europe and Austria. And at that time, you recommended an extensive soft change for Austria to exploit previously unused OTC potential. From your perspective now, have we made any progress, or how is the journey going on for Austria? What do you think?
Well, as you know, your constitutional court has ruled against the expansion. And there are people who say that that's very good. There are people in the industry who say the pharmacy is the place where we should sell our consumer healthcare products under the advice of the pharmacist, who's the best qualified person to give advice other than a doctor. But the doctors really don't want to get into this topic. Now, the advice when we did our project for you was that although we respect the pharmacist, although we think the pharmacy is the premier place to discuss consumer healthcare, there are some very, how can I put it, low-dose products, small packs, products that have been around for 100 years, which could be sold in drugstores or even the mass market. We think that consumers benefit from availability. We think that awareness and self-selection helps. Now, your constitutional court has taken a different point of view. In time, I think Austria will catch up because it's the trend. We're beginning to see a movement in countries like Italy. We're beginning to see a movement in countries like Germany. These are small steps. When we see outside of Europe, what chains do in terms of educational programs, counseling, consultation rooms, I think it's inevitable that Austria catches up. Now, COVID has put everything back. You know, it's not just it's a year, and I think probably 2 years of a different agenda. I think it's brought consumers back to the basics. Stick to brands and buy where you know you can get good advice, which is the pharmacy, and where you don't need advice, you can get those products very easily through e-commerce. And that, I think, will be a way forward for the next couple of years, 2 to 3 years. But after that, I think it is still a good discussion point, and governments and courts can have their mind changed by consumers, by manufacturers, by bodies, very good bodies like yourself, associations. So I would say that the soft changes in distribution are still valid, but at this stage, we haven't made any progress because from 2017 to now, half that time has been COVID. That's
true. You talked about the DM and the unsuccessful application to the Constitutional Court. You've answered part of my question, but can you get into more details what this court rule is doing for the OTC industry? Do you think it's an advantage that we stay in the pharmacy, or is it missing out several outlets, or does it give e-commerce even more chance as there is no other way to shop OTC in Austria now?
So I'm a great believer in what we call pharmacy point of care, which is where you go into a pharmacist, you have a knowledgeable conversation, an informed conversation about your healthcare needs, where the pharmacist or the pharmacy assistant will, in a sense, understand your symptoms. They're not going to give you a diagnosis, but they understand your symptoms. They make recommendations. And based on that, you can select different medicines without going to a doctor, which is a different type of health advice. The problem is most pharmacies don't work like that. They're busy. People are coming in. They've got prescriptions to be dispensed. You still see some pharmaceutical reps in there, not many these days, but you still, there's lots of traffic. The other thing is that pharmacies, particularly in continental Europe, are very small compared with the huge department stores we have in the UK or the US. And if I, as a male, want to talk about sexually transmitted disease to a female pharmacist, well, it isn't going to happen. Of course, it isn't going to happen because I don't have it. But even if I had that as a theoretical consumer, I don't want to talk about that. And a woman doesn't want to talk about intimate topics of menopause and those sort of conditions. We don't even really want to talk about smoking control. It's too intimate. It requires us to tell about our lifestyle. Now, there has been a move in some pharmacies to have consultation rooms, although outside of Australia, I've never really seen those well used. Now, that isn't improved by DM, of course it isn't, but it is helped by e-commerce, e-pharmacy. What DM does, I think, is, and I only name that because they are very keen. It could be any other drugstore chain. It could be a food chain. They try to demystify the simpler products. They make them available with limited information, literature on display, and the consumer can make a choice. They become true self-selectors, which is how the market has gone in many other parts of the world. So we want both. We want all three with e-commerce. We want the majority to go through pharmacists who will give you advice, but you can't self-select. We want the simple throat lozenges and the like, simple pain relievers, simple antacids, proven over many decades to be safe. We want those freely available so it becomes a simple choice. Do I want this one or that one? We also know that companies like, or retailers like DM, they bring the price down. So there's a price advantage for the consumer. I think we need that. So as I say, that and then the primary source of advice coming through the independent pharmacy in Austria or chain pharmacies elsewhere, that to me is win-win. Everybody benefits from that. And the chain and the pharmacy, they still have big business. They will have loyal customers. And by talking to those customers in a certain way, they can sell more in a way that's legitimate. I mean, they don't sell for the sake of it, but if a customer needs 3 products, not 1, they can tell them you need 3 products for these conditions. And that's good for sales and it's good for the customer's health.
Well, thanks for your insights. At the end, what else needs to be done to make OTC brands even better on the Austrian market to increase our sales and to be successful in the long term?
Well, Christina, and I've learned at your conferences and you've been to mine, we talk a lot about understanding the consumer and the consumer journey. I know in these days we're not supposed to refer to gender, but I'm old-fashioned enough to say the consumer is queen. My colleague Nina Stimpson, who's worked with you, has shared with you those results. Women consume well over 60% of all consumer healthcare products, and they purchase between 85 and 90%. And we just have to get closer to the consumer, understand how they've changed in COVID. What do they need that we're not providing? Take away the mystery where they don't understand the information we give. The average patient insert is, you need a science degree to understand it. I mean, and you also need triple lens glasses to read the tiny print. And at the end of it, I'm in the business and I still can't understand what I'm supposed to do next. The consumer journey has to be made simpler in every way. This means that your association members have to design products that more precisely fit the needs of the new consumer. The new normal, as we talk about it, we don't know what it is and we don't know when it's going to start, but it will be different. And I think we've just got to, as manufacturers and the people who support them, yourself, ourselves, have just got to have a better conversation with the consumer, bring more relevant products to market. I would say widen the distribution, but that's a point we can debate. And then I think we'll be successful. The consumer has so many needs that we're not satisfying at the moment. And they tell us that when we talk to them in market research, they tell us how many of their needs aren't being met and how confused they are by the products we have on offer. Too many of them.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for these brilliant insights. And it was great talking to you. And
Absolutely.
hope to see you soon in real, hopefully normal life again. And thanks for your time and thanks for the interview.
You're very welcome. Can I just say that our last conference, face-to-face physical conference, was supposed to be in Athens last year. We postponed it 3 times. Last week, we had the e-commerce equivalent, but everyone says we need to meet in person. We're targeting April 2022 in Athens. We hope you'll be there as our guest, Christina, and we hope to meet all our friends. We normally have 250 people there. I'm so looking forward to that, meeting people, chatting, shaking hands, and, having the debrief in the bar at midnight.
Well, then, thanks for you, and hope all the podcast listeners will join us all in Athens next year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Liebes Podcast-Publikum, wenn Ihnen diese Folge von IGEPHA im Gespräch gefallen hat, dann hören Sie auch das nächste Mal wieder rein und abonnieren Sie unseren IGEPHA-Podcast. Wo Sie den Podcast IGEPHA im Gespräch finden können? Auf unserer Homepage und auf allen großen Podcast-Plattformen. Danke fürs Dabeisein.